Okay, guys. So I think we can start. Welcome all. My name is Pavel Klushin. I'm leading the solution architects efforts at Qwak, an ML engineering platform. And today in this session, we're going to go through how to deploy high-scale ML models without the hassle. In this workshop, the agenda will be first to discuss about why it's hard to deliver high-scale models, ML engineering with Qwak, what is our way to do that, and we will do a hands-on workshop. In that workshop, we will show you how to take a model, build it, train it, deploy it, and do inference and analyze the request using Qwak platform. If you have any questions, please write it in the chat, and we can discuss this after the hands-on workshop. Okay, so let's start with why it's so hard to deliver ML platforms and ML projects. So I just wrote some important bullet points about, for every software development project, you know how to test, version, deploy, monitor your code. This is something that currently it's not an easy way to do with ML models. How to test that your new version won't break the production, that you didn't enter some key that will break something. How to manage different versions in scale, because today you maybe have one model, but what if you have a team with 10 data scientists or more that want to see different models and to manage them and to share the models between them? And once you're getting to the part that the models versions are ready, you want to deploy them and get, whether if it's a real-time endpoint, which is just up and running and can get inferences, or a batch deployment for more offline models, or streaming. What if you have Kafka topics that you want to connect with? And now when the models are running, let's say you have a peak in the service and you want to duplicate and scale your endpoints if it's a real-time endpoint. So you need to build some kind of endpoint auto-scaling mechanism. Once the models are running with high scale, you want to monitor the entire data to see if you have any drifted data, any changes, and you also want to be alerted on top of that. And once you're alerted, you want to have a full automated cycle that retrains again the model once the data is drifted, uploads the model, and maybe deploy the model automatically if the new version has a higher accuracy or any other metric than the current deployed one. So in order to get a real ML platform, you need to have all of those different points addressed with some managed solution. The way we see it in Qwak, and this is what we develop here, is a managed solution that helps you to productionize models. And this is what we're going to do also in the session today, just to take an example of model and using the Qwak platform, deploy and get a real-time endpoint. So just a quick few notes about what is Qwak. So Qwak is a managed solution that provides a way, once the research part is done, to deploy models and to productionize them. So in order to do that, we have under the Qwak platform 5 different services. We're starting with the build system, and this is something that we took inspiration from classical software development solutions, where you know how to take a code and get an artifact out of that. This is exactly what we're doing with the build system. So we're integrating to the ML model with an SDK. We're moving through the serialization part, giving you an option to write some integration test and unit test. And once the build process is finished, then you will have a Docker image ready to be deployed. Then it can be deployed into our hosting system and get a serving API. This could be a real-time endpoint with auto-scaling behind the scenes based on different metrics. It could be batch deployed if you want to have more offline models, or it could be a streaming endpoint which can be connected to different Kafka topics. Once the models are running, we're also collecting and storing all the different prediction data within a data lake. So you can analyze the data, you can also monitor the model performance metrics, like what is my F1 score in production? What is my accuracy in production? Under the platform, we also have a feature store. It's not something that we will address today, but our feature store is a managed ETL solution to solve the trainer serving SKU problem and to have a catalog of all the different features that you have inside of the organization for sharing purposes and storing them in offline store for training purposes and in online store for serving the features in a real-time endpoint. And lastly, what we have inside of Qwak is the automations part. So different kind of services can be connected with different solutions. So for example, if you want to have a full automated cycle of once you're receiving a drift alert, you want to automate a training and do a deployment if the new model version is accuracy is higher than the other one or any other metric, this can be automated with the automation flow. Okay, so now we want to go to the hands-on workshop. And in order to do that, I created a documentation that I sent you over the chat. In this document, it's like a getting started wizard of how to do that with Qwak. And I'll also walk you through how to do that with us. I see that some people have some connection issues and hearing. I hope that you all hear me. If it's a more global issue, just ping me. Okay, so the first step that we want to do is create some clean environment with poetry or virtual env and install the SDK. Let me just reshare the screen again so we'll see the documentation. Okay, so once you have a clean environment, you can install our SDK. Let me show you how to do that in my example. I'll share again my screen. I'll share the entire screen. One second, some issues with the sharing. Okay, seems that I can't share my IDE. So let's assume that we're running this command and installing our SDK. This is something that should take about a minute or two once you have the clean environment. Once you configure this environment, all you need to do is to run the command of Qwak configure. In order to configure the API key that will be authenticated with the Qwak environment that we created. So this is the API key that should be inserted once the SDK is running. And in order to build a model, you can go to our console, which is app.qwak.ai. This is the user that you should use, Toronto plus workshop@qwak.com, and the password should be MLOps 2022. In order to start a project, I'll do it using the UI for a second. Okay, so in my example, I'll create some project example. The project, it's a folder that can manage different kinds of models. So this is my Pavel project folder. And the description will be MLOps. Okay. Over here, once I've created a project, I can create different kinds of models. It can be real-time models. It can be, for example, the project can be a customer that has an issue that you want to solve with models, and you want to have different types of models, so you can create different types. So let's create this Titanic model version, Pavel, Titanic model Pavel, my dummy example. Okay. Once I created a model, I can then start and upload different models into your environment. I can start training the model, so you will see the build part, deployment part, and inference part over here. So in order to do that, I want to share my IDE, but it seems that I have some sharing issues. So one second, I'll try to do that as well. Okay, just because I couldn't share my IDE, so I just created some screenshots of how it looks like. And once you ran the Qwak model init example command, you will then extract the Titanic survival classification model, which is a dummy example of how to run this model using Qwak. Under here, you can see that we've created two folders, a main folder with the model and all the requirements, and the test folder. Over here, you can run some testings of the model itself. Once I clicked on the model py example, and you can see it in your IDE, you can see how the model looks like and what you need to do in order to work and deliver new projects with Qwak. So all you needed to do is simply add the import Qwak SDK and wrap the model with a class that inherits from Qwak model interface. And over here, you can see that we have a set of methods: init, build, schema, and predict. And those methods will be the functions of how to deliver new framework, how to deliver new models. Only two of them are mandatory, so I opened the build and the predict one. So if I'll go over the build, we'll try to extend this so we will see better. You can see that under the build function, I'm doing a simple training. I'm downloading some data set, cleaning the data, fitting the CutBoost object that I'm initializing in the previous function, and then I'm printing the val accuracy metric and logging that, so you will be able to see it in Qwak. The next function that you can see here, which is the mandatory one, is the predict function. This returns us the answer of the prediction. In this case, it's a Titanic survival classification, so if this passenger from Titanic will survive or not. You can see that this predict function is also wrapped with a Qwak API decorator. So this is our log collection platform that stores all the inputs and outputs of the predict function. What we also have as part of the project, and if I'll go back again, you can see that I have also the Conda file and the tests. In my case, it's Conda because I'm working with Conda dependencies, but you can also work with poetry, requirements text file, or any other dependencies that you wish. You can see that over here, I configured what are the different models and the dependencies that we need in order to have a running model, a running Docker image with all the different dependencies, because the deployment of the dependencies installation is installed in the build process and not in the deployment part. So the deployment will be very fast. So this is regarding the requirements test. And regarding the testing capabilities, another part that we have inside of Qwak is the ability to do some sanity checks, integration test, or unit test over the different running builds. So in this example, once the build process is finished, as part of the build process, we will also launch a container, like a serving container, and you can do different types of tests. So I wrote a Python function that mocks a feature vector inference, because I know that this user with those parameters should give me a survive probability which is higher than a certain amount. If I'm getting something else, the build will be broken and I won't be able to deploy this to production at all. So this is the structure that we have for the build phase. And now, in order to run a new build, I'll just share again the different commands. Okay, so in order to create a build command, if we'll go back to sharing the example, you need to run a simple command with RCLI of Qwak models build with the model ID that we've created. So I created some Titanic model with my name, which was Pavel, and the build process will start now to launch a container and start to deploy and run all the Docker environment requirements. So we will download and install the dependencies from the requirements file. We're launching the build process, and once the build process is finished, we will then have a deployable artifact that we can run and deploy and create an endpoint. In this example, I'll create a real-time endpoint, so we will be able to send inference requests to. Okay, so I ran the command, and you will be able to see, let me just share again the Qwak interface. Okay, if I'll go again back to my dashboard, so you can see that I have my project, Pavel project. If I'll go in, you can see the different models that I created. I created a Titanic model Pavel example. And if I'll go into this one, you can see that under builds, I just created a new build, which is now running. And if I want to see all the different steps of this build, I'd be able to just open this one and see the entire flow of what's now happening. So during the build phase, we're launching an instance. Inside of this instance, we're launching a container, starting to download and install all the dependencies, running the build function, exporting this build as an artifact, and then validating that, running the test that I wrote in the different function, and then pushing the artifact to the model registry. A bit about behind the scenes of how we're working. So Qwak is a managed solution that can be deployed in a SaaS way in two different deployment methods. One way is a fully SaaS environment, which we can be installed in our cloud environment. And the other way is the hybrid deployment, which means that we can deploy Qwak services inside of your cloud account. So once we are creating a hybrid deployment, we're launching a Kubernetes cluster behind the scenes with different Qwak services. So when we're performing a build process, we're launching a container in this Kubernetes example, in this Kubernetes cluster, and over there, we're holding and creating all the build process. So this build process will take a couple of minutes because we're starting to launch a container with different dependencies, installing them. So it can take a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, I want to show you other examples that we can do with the build. I'll just share it in the documentation because it will be more convenient to see. Okay, so we can see it under the definition as well. So if I'll go to the code, you will be able to see for each version the code that was uploaded into this environment, the different tests. So if you have different and many other environments and many other models, you can see the differences between of them. Inside of the definition, you can see all the different advanced parts of the model build itself. So you can see if you want to run a model build and take a model from a Git repository. So you can pass some Git branch location. What is the URI of the Git branch and the location. You can also specify the resources that needed. So in this case, we're launching a build on the default container size, which is 2 CPUs and 4 gigabytes of memory without any GPUs. If you need to have GPUs or CPUs more than 2 or more than 4, you can just specify it with a flag command of Qwak model build ---- CPU 4, for example, or GPU type 1. If I'll go to the resources, I can see the resource monitoring utilization of how much CPU and memory we're utilizing during the build process. So we just launched it, so we can see how much memory it was needed in order to perform this build. If I'll now go to the logs again, you can see that now we're just installing the dependencies because it's the first time. We don't have any cache to that, so we will be able to install them, and it will take a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, I can show you on a different example how it looks like. So if I'll go into my demo example, okay, you can see that in this example, it's a different model that I'm running. I have multiple different versions that were created. This is the version that currently deployed. You can see the build ID. You can see different parameters and metrics for each version. And if I'll open a version, you will be able to see this is exactly the example that you will be able to see in a couple of minutes in our workshop model as well. So you can see the output of each phase. During the build function, I printed what was the validation accuracy. You can see the test that running or not running, and you can also see the resource utilization for CPU and memory utilization. So this is the part that is currently running in our workshop environment. And once this process is finished and you want to deploy that, you can simply go to the builds, click on deploy. And in this case, we're using a real-time endpoint. So you can choose if you want to have a CPU-based deployment or a GPU-based deployment, the amount of resources that are needed in order to have this running endpoint. And you can also choose if you want to replace the current running version, meaning 100% of the traffic will be replaced, or you want to add a variation, which means I can do a silent release and set, okay, 100% of the traffic to the new endpoint will go silently, and this new endpoint won't retrieve the predictions to the backend. Or you can just split the traffic and say, I'm now launching a V2 endpoint and splitting that 20% of the traffic will go to the new endpoint and 80% will go to the older one. So if I'll deploy this, once I'll click on deploy, we will now launch a container with the new version. It will be running and the traffic will be routed to this one. As you remember, I deployed only 20% of the traffic. So if I'll go and now I want to see what is happening, I can now simply see the interface of the model. So we're creating an endpoint and you can interact with the endpoint and take this code snippet, copy that, and you can see how to access this using a REST call, for example, a curl command, or just copy a Python example for using our SDK. Once the models are running, you can also see different types of monitoring aspects. So for example, the overview of the service health. So how much traffic this model is getting, response time, throughput over time, latency, CPU and memory metrics of this container that holds the metric. And you can also connect those metrics to different alerts. So for example, if I have an error rate that is above 5% for 3 minutes, send me a Slack notification. Okay, once those models are deployed, you can also analyze and see all the different prediction data. So we can query that simply during using the analytics. So once I'll query that, I will be able to see here all the different prediction metrics. So every row here represents a prediction that was made to the model, what was sent to the model, and what was the output. In this case, it's a churn model. What was the output probability? This is a raw data that you can take and see with other tools, also the monitoring, and also with Qwak, the distribution of features, feedback loop. This raw data is stored as Parquet files in the object storage of this environment. So you can also access this data and see other metrics as well. So I want to go back to our environment and see if we're just, if we can deploy it again, the workshop environment, if it's finished or not. Okay, I think it's finished. So 1 second. Okay, so now you can see that the build process that I created is finished. It took me 10 minutes to upload and train a model. You can see the different parameters and metrics that I logged. And as you can see, I can deploy this model and I can choose if I want to have it as a real-time endpoint, a REST endpoint, batch deployed for more offline work, or a streaming endpoint, which can be connected to Kafka topics. So as you can see, let's do like with a simple example. Deploy. Now we're just deploying this model, and you can also do it and test it with your own workshop environment. Once this will be created, we will be able to see the interface. So it will take a minute. If you have questions, feel free to write it in the channel. It's a good time to take some questions. Okay, it's still deploying. Okay, I can see that the endpoint is deployed. So we can start running some inferences in a minute. Okay, so as you saw, we have also the interface created. So I can just copy that, and I created in my example in the Getting Started guide a feature vector with some data. So if I'll open a simple notebook and show you how I can inference that endpoint, okay, you can see that I just copied the endpoint using the SDK that I have. I filled in the different data set of this model, and I just configured the model ID to be running with my model, Titanic model Pavel. And now if I'll just run this command, should be able to see the inference. So you can see, okay, I got a survival probability of certain. So this is my return. And if I'll change the P class to 2, I can see different surviving probability, 1. Cool, so I can see different answers. So this is a real-time endpoint that now is exposed and can be getting some inferences. And if his age will be 26, let's see if it goes. Okay, cool. If I'll go back now to my console, we can see what we saw earlier before with my example in my demo environment. So you can see under the overview, you'll be able to see the different predictions, the response time, the throughput, all of this area, how much request I had per minute. This is an average for 5 minutes. And if I'll go to the analytics, it takes a couple of minutes to generate the data. So just check if I have this data already generated or not. Okay, so I can see that I have all the different predictions that I sent with different input classes and different ages sent to Qwak, and you can also see the different output probability. So this is what I wanted to cover in this quick workshop. Any questions? This could be a good time to ask any questions in the chat. Okay, so Richard, for your question, the workshop is running on our cloud environment. Inside of the documentation that I sent, you have the way to access this platform. You have username, password, and you have a getting started wizard of how to do that. Any other questions, guys? Aaron, I can email you the presentation links. So if anyone wants the materials, feel free to send me an email or just share your email so I can send you the information. So you can see my information over here. I can send you an email with my information. You can send me an email with the different documentation and all the other parts. Presentation, Jupyter Notebook. And I can see that the organizer sent also that we will share different copies over email. Okay, guys, if you don't have any other questions, thank you all for joining. It was a pleasure meeting you. If you're also visiting the Toronto Summit this week, feel free to jump over at our booth, say hello. Thank you all.